when a light bulb blew, and with LEDs, those days have kind of gone. And under the new eco design regulations, the famous 4.1 paragraph, these will be coming back. The replaceable light source, I should say, instead of a lamp, the replaceable light source and replaceable control gear, and that's all going to come back. And today we're going to discuss that. Is that the right route to go down? What are the benefits? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? So we're going to have a debate on that today. So today's event is really is a new type of format. So instead of presentations, we've had a lot of those. We're going to have a brief presentation from Helen Looms, who's the Business Development Director at Trilux Lighting in the UK. And she is going to share the conclusions that the company had with the EU-funded Recolight research project into what is a future luminaire, what is a light fitting of the future, what should it look like, what should it be like, how should it work. And Trilux has done a lot of really interesting research and into this, and she will share her conclusions, very interesting conclusions about particularly about replaceability and replaceability of components. So I won't steal Helen's thunder, but we'll have a short presentation from her, and then we'll get into a discussion about that topic and about how we can generally make lighting and lighting products more sustainable. I am Ray Maloney, and I will be your chairman for the next hour or so. And on our panel, we have Oriana Georgiou, who is the Secretary General of Lighting Europe, the voice of the lighting industry, and that is a federation of lighting associations right across Europe. And Oriana is both physically and close to regulators in Brussels, and she knows their mindset, and she knows how they think, and she knows what's coming down the track. So it'll be very interesting to get her feedback on the direction of travel. As I say, we've got Helen will give a presentation and represent the manufacturers. Also from the manufacturing side, we have John Gorse, who's Technical Solutions Manager at Signify, formerly Philips Lighting. I don't know how long I'll have to keep saying that, but anyway, formerly Philips Lighting. From the specifier point of view, we have Kevin Shaw, leading independent lighting designer, who is the design director of KSLD, now part of EFLA engineering consultancy. I think that was in 2018 that they joined forces. Also today we have Nigel Harvey, the CEO of Recolight, who will give us the background on recycling and management of waste and sustainability in general. And then we have Dave Tilley, who's the founder of Lightology, and Dave is a well-known figure in the lighting industry, very close to the market, very close to customers, and knows how they think and who's going to pay for what. And that is a key part of making this sustainability thing and the circular economy thing work. Is there a cost? And if there's a cost, who pays for it? So this session is being recorded, and those of you who registered, you will get a link to the recording in about an hour. We should finish between 12 and 12:30. So just so you know the timings. Usual housekeeping. What I would ask is that today you would use the Q&A box for your questions. So just pop your question in there. And if you could reserve the chat box for questions, technical questions for Suzanne, our colleague from Recolight, and stuff about if you've got sound issues, you've got registration issues, or anything like that. And then questions for the panel, please put those in the Q&A box, because that is the box I will be looking at and monitoring as we go along. Okay. Now there's our 3 previous webinars from this year. They are all still available. So you go to recolight.co.uk, follow the links, and there's recordings there available, and you don't need to register, and you can go back and look at any individual presentation, and there's some really interesting stuff there. So I do recommend that. Very interesting discussions. and they were more presentation based. Today, we're looking at, it's more of a discussion format. And also, just to mark your card, that on Tuesday, the 1st of December, we will continue this conversation, and we'll be looking more specifically at luminaires at the end of life, at the end of their first life, to be strictly speaking, because the time will come when we can't just chuck luminaires in a skip. So what do we do with them? How do they get them reused, reduced, recycled? What happens to them? And that is going to be a very interesting discussion. So that will be on Tuesday, the 1st of December. I think it starts at midday. But as I say, check the website and stay in the loop, and you can and we'll join us for that. Just to give a brief roundup of recent developments in circular economy lighting, and I'll recap on the last webinar rather. News in the last few weeks, the Spanish firm Lamp, who I perceive as the thorn of Spain. It says that it's instilling a circular economy mindset into its production of luminaires at its factory in Barcelona. It says a third of its luminaires now use recycled aluminium extrusion at a rate of 80 to 85%. And this in turn leads to a 70% reduction in direct carbon emissions during manufacture. And Lamp says it uses only 5% of energy in comparison with the amount used in the original process. The company has been awarded the Aluminium Stewardship Initiative certification for its environmental and social responsibility in managing its aluminium value chain. Now, I hadn't heard of it either. This is the iron suspended luminaire that uses recycled aluminium. So that's an interesting development of note. Closer to home, the UK manufacturer Whitecroft has had one of its fittings rated by the Cradle to Cradle certified organization as a bronze level for its circular economy credentials. So shout out to Whitecroft. I know we've have some of their product development team joining us as attendees today. So good stuff, guys, to see you innovating here. So Whitecroft says the Cascade Flex marks the first step on its circular journey. So the company has basically redesigned it, and they've managed to remove 50% of the plastics used in the product. Now, the center optic is removable, it's reusable, it's replaceable, and recyclable. And the whole product, they say, uses 3 times less plastic than a traditional flat panel. And Whitecroft estimates that a regular flat panel contains the equivalent of 102 plastic bottles, while this product uses only 34 plastic bottles. So in a school project where you got 600 of these fittings, that's the equivalent of saving 40,000 plastic bottles. So it's not insignificant at all. This is a recent project, which is the upgrade of the headquarters of the Cheshire Police Authority in Winsford. And here was decided to reuse and upgrade many of the existing fittings instead of simply replacing them. The facilities team was from BAM Construct, and the supplier was Whitecroft again, and it transported 120 of its Cirrus light fittings back to its factory, upgraded them to LED. So it was possible to reuse the luminaire body, the louvre, and the flying leads, and the retrofitted luminaire provided the required level of efficiency, but it was £30 rather cheaper to make compared to new light fittings. And Whitecroft estimates that 2,000 kilograms of material was saved, and each light uses 23 watts less energy than its predecessor. So that's a couple of interesting developments piping out. So things are happening, manufacturers responding, customers expressing interest. So hopefully this is the beginning of something. And now just to pick up on the last webinar for anybody who missed it. Now in it, Peter Fordham, who's the electrical engineering design manager at Sainsbury's, made a plea that any price premium on product for a luminaire with circular economy principles, he would have to be able to justify that in terms of the total cost of ownership. And that makes sense, really. I mean, he says that, Sainsbury's wants to do the right thing. They're committed to sustainability, but he needs to be able to make the business case for it. And that's kind of where we're at, really. If there's a premium, we need to be able to justify it, and guys like Peter need to be able to justify it and make the case for it as a total cost of ownership. There you go. There's Sainsbury's. Right, here's Helen on the right here. So I'm going to hand over to Helen, and I'm not going to steal her thunder. And I'll invite you to talk about the future Luminaire and the results of your research. And I know we've also got, I didn't name check, Sebastian Knocke, who's the research manager of Trilux, and we have him with us today, and he can help with any of the, because he did a lot of the research, I believe. So Helen, I'm going to unshare my screen now and hand over to you. So there you go.
Okay, thank you. Did that go smoothly? Have you got my slide?
That's fine. We can see you. Yes, it all looks good.
Wow, wonderful. Okay, thank you very much, Ray. I'm delighted to be here today. The Recolight project has been conducted over the last 3 years, and there are many different manufacturers involved. But the Trilux activity was predominantly to look at the sustainability and the circular economy of just one of our luminaires. And there was a lot of research went into this. And on the last webinar, I went through it in just 15 minutes. It actually deserves a lot more time than that. And this is the full presentation, which is available on YouTube. And I'll make sure that Suzanne has this link, so you can go and watch the full presentation if you want to. Now, in this presentation is Dr. Sebastian Knock, and he's going to also help me today if you've got any questions that I can't answer. So it's really helpful to have him with us. So if we move on, just like to quickly summarize some of the findings to kick off the discussion today. And really, when it comes to sustainability, we've got two approaches, which are very laudable goals. The first is to create a luminaire that will last a considerable length of time, but is also manufactured to use as little material as possible, especially the precious materials. And this luminaire could be designed to have accessible control gear, which could be exchanged if necessary, but the LED board would be fixed. The second approach is to reconfigure the designs of all luminaires so that both the control gear and the LED board can be replaced. But this change in design will have other consequences. So what am I talking about? Will they help sustainability? So if we look at the reason why we might exchange an LED module, this is replacing the module if it fails instead of the complete luminaire. And when we looked at our actual after-sales data at Trilux, we saw that only 1% of the luminaires are expected to fail within their nominal lifetime, and the largest percentage is due to the control gear. The LED module accounts for less than 0.25% of all failures. So it really is a small amount, 1/4%. And if we look at an example of an industrial hall with 369 luminaires, because of this 1% failure rate, we assume that 4 will fail, 3 because of the control gear and just 1 because of the module. So on the left-hand side of those two diagrams is a non-exchangeable module, and on the right side, an exchangeable one. So on the exchangeable one, we've now got this small design change. And for example, we have to account for some additional connectors in the luminaire, which have additional ADP elements. This is the rare earth metals. And therefore the problem escalates. And because we now have these extra connectors in all 400 luminaires, just to have the ability to change one luminaire, then we escalate the problem. And this is because the extra energy used for that additional component outweighs any savings you make in energy by replacing the LED. So in total, you end up with a very small negative extra. And I just want to show this in a pictorial way, and you can see what a small occurrence this is. So is it justified to adapt all luminaires to have a benefit in just one case? And maybe it would be expedient to buy an extra luminaire at the start of the project. And if you have a large project, this is probably easier to accept, then the equation will change considerably if you've got a small project. So a couple of scenarios here. In an office where commodity products are used, the project will probably last for the expected lifetime of the product, and then it would be acceptable that only the control gear is changeable. However, if you've got a more specialized luminaire where the appearance of the product is contributing to the interior design of the space, you've got a very different decision. If one fails, you might not be able to replace it with the same design. So the temptation would then be to replace all the luminaires, which is definitely not sustainable. So in this case, it probably is more prudent to make sure that the luminaire is fully repairable. Another reason you might want to exchange the LED module is in a scheduled replacement of degraded LED modules in order to restore the luminaire's energy efficiency and possibly improve it if LEDs have improved. So we know that the light output decreases over time, and because of this, you have to use a maintenance factor in the light planning to ensure that at the end of the lifetime, you've got sufficient illumination for the application, which means overlighting from the very start. So the apparent solution to both points is to say we'll regularly exchange the LED modules so that we always have the most efficient one. But the great drawback is that you generate even more LED module waste, which do contain these precious metals. In the diagram on the right, we show an application with 100,000 hours of lifetime, and it does pay off to regularly change the LED modules. With no update of LED module, the left column in this diagram, you can see it has the most energy consumption. With 1, 2, or 3 exchanges over these 100,000 hours, you are decreasing the energy consumption compared to the materials used. But there is this further aspect. Because for 3 changes, you have to produce 3 more LED modules, and the old ones are very typically just disposed of as waste. From the material point of view, it's not a good solution. And of course, there is the alternative, which is not new, great solution, constant light output, where you're programming the luminaire to compensate the LED degradation by increasing the forward current through the LEDs. This also means that you can avoid the maintenance factor in your light planning. So again, you're saving energy by not overlighting on day one. You also have no additional material for the LED modules, and as you can see under the 2 diagrams, it has the lowest material input needed. And from an energy aspect, it's nearly as good as one exchange of the LED module. The only way that exchanging the LED modules to keep the efficiency high might become valid is if you can reduce the orange blocks. These are the LED module spare parts. And of course, we don't know what might happen in the future. So I just want to go through our conclusions. It's a bit odd that I show you conclusions before the discussion starts, but it might help to clarify our thoughts. So we have a trade-off between energy efficiency and material efficiency. And as is usually the case with lighting, you have to dig a little bit deeper and understand the application. So should exchangeability of components be enforced? And I think we sort of have an answer. It's not simple, and regulation might be oversimplifying it. So, but I think that's for our discussion today. However, it still seems that people replace their lighting for reasons other than that they have reached the end of their life. And, you know, we do tend to keep something that we really love. For instance, this beautiful old-fashioned light fitting, which I have one here on my desk, and I do have access to very technical luminaires with beautiful light output, but I choose to have this one on my desk, and to dim it, I have to have a piece of lace to put over the lamp when it's too bright and I'm presenting. So we go a lot of times with what we love, something that we like. Why do we really change our luminaires? Can we somehow make technical luminaires more lovable? So that's another question for you. So Ray, I'll hand back to you and see what everybody has to say.
Thank you, Helen, for putting what I would say is quite a complex argument there, and you simplified it for people like me, which is great. So thank you. So Ariana, you're the first person to come to really, you know, in mind of the eco design regulations that are coming down the track. You know, could you address Helen's point? Are the regulations oversimplifying things? That's the question, really.
I think it's fair to say that that's the biggest challenge in any rulemaking exercise. How do you come up with a simple enough rule for people to understand and apply on their products and for others to enforce on the one hand? And then how do you take into account the diversity of products and of applications? And that's really the gist of the discussion we've been having with regulators across Europe, so the European Commission and at national level in Lighting Europe, when we negotiated the rules on eco-design and this removability, replaceability requirement. I remember sitting in someone's office and having a conversation about how you cannot just make one blanket rule, removability of light source to everything, because it doesn't take into account street lamps, swimming pool lamps, those kinds of things. And the person in front of me was saying, but yes, but Rania, I want to be able to change the light on my desk lamp. So a desk lamp as opposed to a street lighting pole, as opposed to a swimming pool lamp, as opposed to office lighting. That's really a challenge with lighting. Fact remains that we do have that requirement now in the eco-design rules that apply as of 1st September next year. As you said, it is now required, Ray, that the light source and the separate control gear can be replaced easily by commonly available tools, unless there's a technical reason that you justify, I can't do that. And in any case, you have to be able to remove them so that market surveillance authorities can check that they comply with the other performance requirements in the legislation. And you actually even have to provide now information to your customer when it's an end customer in a shop, even on the packaging, explaining whether the light source and the control gear is replaceable or not. So that requirement is there in the EU, and I understand that the UK will also be introducing that as part of its adoption of the eco-design rules sometime next year. Now, what's interesting is that Helen's project shows that in some cases that is not the most efficient solution. So moving forward now, we need to balance this on the one side, the market pull of what do people buy, what do people need in terms of technology and applications, and on the other side, this regulatory push. And there is clearly a huge drive in regulation to promote circular economy thinking and to promote sustainability. In Lighting Europe, it came up as one of our top priorities when we made our strategic roadmap for 2025 back in 2016. So the lighting industry has embraced sustainability as a growth opportunity that delivers value to people and to the industry. The challenge now is managing everything that is coming out of regulators' offices, or actually bedrooms lately, and getting that into a more strategic approach. So I was sitting with the team a couple of weeks ago, and we were doing our planning for next year on our sustainability work. And we came up with 15 regulatory initiatives that are in the pipeline or will be coming out in the next 12 months, 15. Looking at substances and products, information requirements, the new eco-design, of course, renegotiating substance restriction rules, introducing mandatory requirements on durability, lifetime, access to spare parts, minimum recycled content. It's vast. So what I find challenging is that I think we all can agree on the objective, and what's difficult is making sure that everybody has enough space to innovate and to be entrepreneurial in order to deliver on the objective, but still address the diversity.
Rihanna, did manufacturer members and your associations want this change? Was there pressure coming from them to bring back replaceability, or was it a top-down sort of, would you say top-down from regulators?
I think it was a mix, but this one of a blanket requirement across the board, it was more top down, and it took a while to convince them that that is not beneficial in all applications, which is why we have this exemption on technical requirements. So the balance we have today is, I think, good enough as a start, and moving forward we need to negotiate everything else as well on a one-to-one basis.
Kevin, if I could bring you in at this point, you're specifying lots of luminaires for your clients. Do you welcome replaceability, or are you are you convinced by Helen's compelling case she made?
I'm much more convinced by Helen's case, and it's much more been in my thinking anyway. I mean, I've also been involved in the regulatory affairs business, and the whole replaceability or removability thing came out of this desire to have an easy way for countries to be able to do market surveillance. Not that they managed to do it at a reasonable level for the lighting industry. So what is happening with this particular stream is that we've got stuff imposed on the lighting industry for market surveillance, which the industry want to stop cheap, bad imported product coming in, but the countries can't afford, and that includes the UK and it includes the main players in Europe, they can't afford to do anything like the amount of market surveillance that's possible. I mean, in terms of replaceability of LEDs, I think we've got to understand what we're dealing with these days. I mean, this is what comes out of a light fitting. It's a strip of LEDs, it's a circuit board, it's connected, or this one was connected by solder connections, not even clips from strip to strip, and the thing is stuck down into the luminaire to provide the best possible heat transfer, which is the one thing that has impact on the life of LEDs. So making this removable is a big question. I mean, this particular thing, this particular product is designed to work for a long time, and the manufacturers thought how to stick the thing down, then how to get it out again in case of failure so they can fix the product. It becomes a much more challenging thing than unclipping something. But at the end of the day, then, as Helen's Trilux's work has pointed out, the number of failures on the LED are minuscule compared to other components. I mean, this is the big baddie, the electrolytic capacitor, which is in all the power supplies. So this wee thing here, and this is a big one compared to the ones we see in most of the power supplies, is the thing that gets replaced. And that is never going to be replaced, even though it's the shortest life item in the current LED light fitting. So on the whole, I'm totally with Helen's and Trilux's work here. And I think that, thinking about replacing light sources in LED luminaires is really wrong thinking in terms of making stuff that works. So I think we need to be much more aware of actual understanding of how long the system is going to last. We get lots of numbers about the life of LEDs, but the reality is the life of the LED is determined not just by what it says, it's determined by the performance of the fitting of the LED, of the gear that goes with it and everything else. John had his hand up, so he wants to come back.
John, where are you?
John,
John,
sorry, Ray.
Yeah, okay, bring you in here, it's John. I didn't see if you had your hand up, but yeah, do you want to come in on this as a manufacturer? What is there? This is a law of unintended consequences. I mean, what's going to happen with lead tape and those sort of linear products?
Okay, so the problem, you can take a step back here, because what we're looking at, and we're often applying the same values that we had in the past on traditional platforms, where basically light sources were the same. They all fitted to a certain standard. There weren't many manufacturers, and essentially you knew what you were doing with light sources and replaceability. Now you've had a progression of really incredible speed, and there are different ways of providing light sources. So a light source is everything from, let's say, a retrofit LED lamp right through to a module or to integration of boards. And it could be, as Kevin says, a strip which has been, for thermal reasons, an adhesive used to keep it very flat to the surface for a heatsink. And no, that's not going to be easy to replace. But there are other opportunities to then start introducing replaceable boards that are already out there in the market. There are improvements in replaceable lamps. The difficulty with this conversation, therefore, and Kevin's point is absolutely spot on, for that particular product. But where my point about going back to the traditional platforms was, you generally had a simple set of arguments. We rarely talked about the luminaire. We talked much more about optics, we talked about gear, but we didn't really talk about the light source itself. So what you have now is a whole new challenge, and I think Helen's presentation absolutely summarized the whole thing. Because you've got complexities, you don't know what the future of that product is going to be. And whilst Kevin's point is completely valid for certain types of product, Brianna's ideas about or contribution regarding changes, the legislation and the ideals which are in and of themselves good for replaceability and a circular future, do rely on having a move towards replaceable light sources. Now, I think if you put a marker in the sand at this time and say, we've got lots of different technologies at the moment that we're going to have to try and talk about here. There is an option, if it's absolutely necessary, to keep a light source which is not necessarily replaceable if you have a good technical reason for it. But I think going forward, having the replaceable, having the units, the light sources, the luminaires effectively, where you can virtually dismantle the whole thing with just regular tools, has got to be something which should be embraced wherever possible. And I think that's the point. Because you do want to get to replaceability, you do want to get to reuse, you do want to be able to repurpose product. And maybe what we should do is stop thinking about products just in and of themselves. Because what we want to really do as an industry is change people's relationships with lighting. So that ultimately you're not just selling a product, you're then selling a service, you're making it part of your entire environmental ecosystem. And that's really important, so that you don't eventually think about just the product in itself, you actually think about where it fits and how it interacts with those different stages through time. And I think that's very important. And to do that and to maximize that wherever possible, you should really push down the route of having replaceability.
Mm-hmm. John, I don't want this is your patch on it, but did Signify welcome this? Did they? I mean, it must be a lot of retooling for you guys to go through your range and make everything replaceable and compliant. So I don't see this being in manufacturers' interest. So, you know, unless there's some imagined time of the glorious days of the replacement market coming back.
Well, even if you just simply said we've got to go straight over to replaceable LED retrofit lamps, you've still got a very long period of time of life. So you're not going to be going back to that sort of planned maintenance that you would have done in street lighting or, you know, with tungsten lamps. So that's not going to be the case. What we as a business and other responsible businesses are now starting to look at is the total contribution we can make to environmentalism. And therefore, we're moving our business model from just purely product manufacturing to something which wants to embrace and help the world achieve its targets, its 2030 targets, its 2050 targets. And that's where we see our responsibility to make it a much more service model. And that service model means changing our products and changing our approach. So in a sense, we're moving away from the challenge of that question, Ray. We're trying to do more to and encourage other manufacturers to be much more aware of the possibilities for a circular economy. And in doing that, you have no choice but to make these changes. I think Kevin wants to come back.
Kevin.
Yes, I think I get the drift that you're talking about, and we've seen this quite a lot. In that there's a push to selling light by the lumen instead of selling light as products. The other thing we've got, I mean, the example we were shown of Whitecroft being prepared to take a large number of luminaires back to retrofit them and rebuild them. The problem is that the majority of lighting installations aren't like that. They are relatively small, relatively few, and certainly when you get into quality, you've got relatively small installations or even large ones with a large variety of different products within them.
Yeah.
Those sort of solutions are never going to make sense for a light by the lumen approach to market. There's still going to be product that's moved into the market and taken out, and you know, the decision of what happens to that at end of life. I also really worry about the replaceability argument. I mean, there are a few things around that do make sense. I mean, Zaga Consortium standards, for example, allow you to theoretically move one thing to another thing to another thing. I mean, that again is not done particularly for replaceability. It was done predominantly to make it much easier for manufacturers to be able to swap components within their products to get economic advantage.
Yes, it was.
Yes, it was.
But the problem I see is that after 50,000 hours or so, we're talking at least 10, more likely 15 or even 20 or even more years when you'd be looking at replacing an LED because they're beginning to reduce their output beyond what is acceptable to the design. Even at that point, if you look at the curves beyond that point, those products, those LEDs still have life in them and are still producing an output. But the other problem is that 10 or 15 years down the line, is it possible to get a direct replacement for an LED, you know, even a better one? Are there not going to be other things that are going to start compromising it? I mean, form factors of LEDs are going to be the big thing that changes, and that is going to be the big limiting factor on retrofitting them into an awful lot of products. Efficiencies, I think we aren't going to see massive efficiency gains from now on. We know that. We would never reach the 200 lumens per watt that was promised by your former company, for one, as the standard, as the standard for general lighting. It isn't going to happen. So the gains on efficiency are going to be slim. Surely the gains in other areas, the electronics areas, are going to be greater. Controllability, the ability to have luminaires and LED boards and things report back how long they have actually been used, what the temperatures are, how they have likely aged on the basis of real data, rather than just guessing, oh, this is 10 years old, strip it out.
John, do you want to come on that back on that briefly, and then I'll go over to Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, if you take the product in isolation, if you take very small installations, there are potentials there to have aggregated service agreements with a local contractor, for example. It's not something that necessarily happens at the moment, but these are things that could be investigated. So the sum of the parts, let's say, of a small estate, you could actually then have a contract issued out to somebody on that estate who would be able to leverage the benefits, the economies of scale of that contractor, approved contractor, going around and operating a service agreement. But just to be brief, the whole point here is, as the one I said before, it's about considering the product, then it's about considering the controls, and then it's about having it as part of your entire ecosystem. And you are going to monitor by doing that. It's exactly what you're saying, Kevin. You are going to then introduce monitoring. You're going to introduce a auditing of the installation. And yes, you are going to have a situation whereby you will get lumen depreciation, but you would have an opportunity during that service agreement to have conversations, maybe repurpose, maybe change the luminaires around, to look at the most efficient way to then harvest product. So you're not throwing it away, you're harvesting product, maybe you could use it again somewhere else, or reuse it, repurpose. You won't do that unless you have that service agreement. It's making people understand now what is possible in the future. So when you talk about end of life, if people understand what it is now and have a consciousness of what's potential at the end of that life or during the midpoints of the life, that's when you're going to get the greatest benefits. And that's why I still say replaceability here. Helen, sorry.
If you just hold your fire, Dave. Helen, you're keen to come in, so.
Yeah, I do agree with you, John. Perhaps we're focusing on the wrong thing. If we're looking at the luminaire and we start bringing in control systems, especially with, we can then start looking at the data that's generated by those control systems, and we have a much better understanding of the whole energy consumption within a project. Also, if we're bringing in lighting controls, that means we are prolonging the life of our LED by dimming them. It also means we have the biggest influence on energy used, which has a much, much bigger impact than just replacing these LED boards. I feel that if our regulation is going anywhere, we should be saying you must use lighting controls.
Yeah.
Because that is going to be the biggest influence sustainably wise. But then also the added advantage of using those controls is we're prolonging the life of the LED, and it's providing data that we can make subsequent decisions from. So that helps our cause so much more than replacing an LED board. And I think maybe we're just focusing on the wrong thing.
Thank you, Helen. Dave, Ariane, I see your hand up. But we haven't talked about the customer here and what the customer wants, what the customer will pay for, etc. Now, Dave, your customers are in retail, logistics, industrial. Are they talking to you about, I need replaceability here. This is an issue for me. I want components that I can interchange, or is that just doesn't come up for you and your clients?
So, if I can, let me just take you back to, I guess, the start of the discussion. So the first thing that I think manufacturers particularly have to understand is there are two markets. There's construction, there's new build, and there's retrofit. The retrofit market is immense, and kind of that's really where people like myself and others promote to, because that's our bread and butter. The issue we have is that manufacturers are all in a competition to build the best product. So let's have the best output. So panels that used to start 600 by 600 panel that started off about 2,800 lumens, which is actually about right, are up in the 3,500, 3,800, 4,000. So for me, when I'm doing a retrofit, I have to do two things. One, advise the client that point for point probably isn't going to be good for their staff. And two, I've got to introduce a control. So if you take the first premise, I've now got a good quality fitting that starts off with the 5-year warranty. And warranties haven't been touched on yet, and they're critical to this. There are now manufacturers that are issuing 7-year warranties, so that's service and materials. If I now add controls, whether the manufacturer is prepared to push the warranty, realistically, I agree with Helen. Controls are essential, particularly in retrofit, if you're going to stay point for point, because it's the only way you will deliver a good working environment. So if you add a control, you're then, where Kevin said, you're out at 15 years potentially, and you've still got reasonable quality lighting. And let's not kid ourselves, specifiers, manufacturers, yeah, I'm kind of 100% with you. You all want quality of light. An end user wants to be able to work within within an environment that they can work in. And if it's not quite right, well, are they really going to pay for an upgrade? Return on investment on retrofits, so kind of not new build, is the key. I've got a client at the moment that's basically said, I've got a corridor, I will not upgrade it to LED unless it returns a specific date on return on investment. So manufacturers kind of have to think about what effectively you're putting onto the market, not just 360 degree, but paring back a bit, kind of almost looking at these markets in two segments: new build and the retrofit market. I mean, I go back to the Whitecroft example. So that's very laudable that they've reused a luminaire. They saved 23 watts, which, given it's a high bay, seems quite low. But as part of that exercise, did the client look at other manufacturers with similar quality products, but at a lower price point, which would have improved the return on investment? And this is from a customer's perspective the key. I work with maintenance companies, and I haven't even got a maintenance company that's saying, yeah, Dave, we're gonna look to find products that we can put in, and we can change the control gear, we can change the modules, because they know that their maintenance cost. I'm not sure if the presentation that showed changing control gear, did that include the actual physical cost of changing the control gear? Because all of these costs is really what the clients are interested in. The gentleman at Sainsbury's, I'm 100% on his side. If I'm going to go into a client, whether it's industrial, retail, commercial, education, health, they all want the same thing. If it's going to go LED, it has to be efficient. It has to show a return on investment. I haven't come across a client that has said, I want LED because I think I should. I like it. Just give me an LED scheme. It's all about return on investment. And as a reuse project, you mentioned I work on a very large industrial project where 7 years ago we put in very high quality, very expensive LED tubes. We're now changing that to a luminaire with a PIR. The LED tubes, even though they're 7 years old, the majority of them still deliver very good light output. So those are going into warehouses where the client, there isn't a return on investment for the client. So the tubes are being put into their maintenance regime. Now, for me, that is good reuse. That is sensible. But one of the last point I'll touch on, which is, I've suffered this for years. We come up with a great plan. You work with a client well. You've put all of these things into place, whether it's about control, reuse, and everything else. Time is a killer. 15 years, even 7, 8 years, staff leave, people forget. So this is kind of all about get it into the mindset of the business. And that element is a lot more difficult than what any of us, I think, would imagine.
Okay, Dave, thank you for that. Peter Fordham, by the way, just popped up and said thanks for the support. I should also point out, I think the Whitecroft fitting, if I'm right, isn't a high bay or a low bay. I think it's a modular, but with the central component. Rania, you wanted to come back earlier.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say that I know we're talking about replaceable light sources today, but that's only one part of what we're discussing more generally. So there is a push towards introducing more smartness, more controls, and there's clear acknowledgement that that will bring benefits not only in energy savings, but also as part of this digitalization drive, so that, you know, when the guy in charge of maintenance leaves 5 years down the line, you can still remember what was installed and what the maintenance cycle is and what components you have in place. So there is a drive in that direction. We had a discussion about regulating lighting systems under eco-design, and now we are discussing new targets for renovation, new energy performance targets for buildings, minimum smartness requirements, regulating BACs, building automation control systems. So that is still underway, and that will be another part of this puzzle. So let's keep that in mind, right? A couple of weeks ago, we had the Renovation Wave initiative, this new policy coming out of Europe saying, by renovating Europe's building stock, not only we will deliver amazing energy savings and achieve our target of being a carbon neutral economy, but we will also stimulate the economy. And in that context, Lighting Europe is saying, great, what we want to see is no renovation without lighting. It has to be LED based. We have to go deep, so luminaires, not just light bulbs, and you need to have the controls and the smartness in there. So it is part of a bigger discussion. It's not just isolated. And the other thing I want to say is, before joining lighting, I worked for the semiconductor industry, and I sat in rooms with guys who have developed chips that will do amazing things in 15 years' time that they don't know what they are, and neither do we. We will buy them and make something with them, but we're also still figuring that out. So the challenge of durability and upgradability and long service life will really be also that. What will electronics offer us in 5 years' time? And is that not a better value proposition for the planet compared to what we have? And that's one where you'll always have to strike a balance.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Nigel, I'm going to bring you in here. A couple of questions. One from Richard Taylor of Graphic Strategy. How do we square the circle of ever-reducing price demands with the need, which he supports, for properly recyclable products? The world needs them. Bringing the message across seems challenging. And then Alan Gooding of Integral LED, the technical and compliance manager, is saying that as we emerge from the pandemic with worldwide economies at critical levels, struggling to balance the online level from a steep decline, how can we afford in the immediate investment of time and energy in creating a circle? So there's similar questions. It's about, who pays for this, and what can you say to that when people raise the price issue?
So you were directing those questions to me, were you?
I am doing. I'll give you the hard questions, Nigel. Yeah, nobody else wants it.
Really appreciate that.
Nobody else wants to talk about price.
I agree totally. It's a really challenging time at the moment with the pandemic. The pandemic's hit the lighting industry hard, and to be facing a whole new raft of design requirements where we're having to fundamentally change our strategy to how our lighting products are produced is really difficult. But at the same time, we've got an even bigger threat out there, and that's the climate emergency. And so, the pandemic will be over in a year's time. The climate emergency is on us and coming closer. And so, taking up the challenge of energy efficiency and material efficiency is really important to us. And Ellen, I did like the point you made that it is a balance between the two of those. I do, Joe, though, just wonder, and it's something that I think Rania was touching on, is that by creating replaceability, don't we give ourselves a space for innovation? Space for innovation in material efficiency in the future, space for innovation in further energy efficiency in the future, and so that by creating luminaires that have a replaceable module future-proofs luminaires in many ways. And we really do have to think more fundamentally about how we're going to make sure that products can stay in use for longer and longer, and replaceability is a way of helping us to achieve that.
Okay, I have a question from Tom Ruddle of Egg Lighting, and he is believe it or not, he's a circular design engineer, and surely that's a job title we want to see more of. And he's asking, how can we ensure that the replaceable light sources do not become proprietary to the detriment of users and industry? So I'm going to go to you, John, for this. As back in the day, you could have an Osram and a Philips and a Sylvania. Are those days coming back? John?
No, sorry, I was just trying to unmute there, right? Sorry.
That's good. You were gathering your thoughts, I think.
No, I was thinking, where's the unmute button, actually? No, those. I don't think those days are coming back, perfectly honest. I think there was a danger of it. I think with the changes now to the legislation through eco-design, and I also think with the slow realization that controls are so important, I think it's not going to become sort of commoditized. I think there's a lot more emphasis on driving forward innovation that fits with replaceability and reuse. And I think that going forward, people will become much more aware of that change in the offering from the lighting industry. So there will be different streams. I mean, Dave Tilley's point was very apt about, return on investment, looking at the different markets. And until people offer something more and educate the market better, then there will be a tendency to look at just price. And there is a tendency for something to become just utilitarian or commoditized. But I don't think that will happen. I think things will change. And Nigel's point, and it's kind of the point I was trying to make before, is that you have to offer these opportunities by making these changes now, so that in the future people will be able to see, and we can teach about what's going to be in the future, and people will start to want to move to these things that offer something more to society, be part of their business, that it's not just going to be about the savings you can make now. It's about what you're going to be able to do to support the environment, to fight the climate emergency. And every company is now going to start feeling it's going to be a lot more incumbent on them. Even SMEs are going to start feeling more incumbent on them to be part of that change. And I think that's very important. So I hope that answers that question, but there is a move away from that, and we are going to see continued development hand in hand with and appropriate for those other things like controls, and companies considering the investment they make now to be part of a long-term, part of their eco philosophy and approach. Sorry, Kevin.
But the replaceable light source will be proprietary. It will be. You can't go to another manufacturer, surely.
Well, I mean, that's what Zaga was there for to some extent. But as has been said, it was predominantly for protecting OEM designs. The proprietary part of it is, yes, it occurs to some extent, but it depends exactly what you're talking about. Are you talking about a lamp, or are you talking about a board? Are you talking about replacement chips? We don't know yet. We don't know how things are going to go. They have become, it is proprietary at the moment in many cases, but going forward, there may well be a requirement to be less proprietary, and that is because the greater benefit to businesses and to manufacturers will come from engaging in the whole service package, and the actual light source itself will become potentially less important, and there may well be synergies that could be produced in the market to encourage the recyclability and the circularity of products, and perhaps that's what you have to do.
Oriana, can you shed some light on this? I mean, I know the regulations aren't specific, but is there an expectation that the products, that the replaceable sources will be proprietary? So you must use the brand, you know, it must be the manufacturer who you bought it from.
There's no requirement. There's no text in the law around that on lighting. Then you can look around at what happens in other sectors. So you take the example of the automotive industry, and you will remember that in the past you had, in order to keep your warranty with your car manufacturer, you had to buy a replacement part that was branded the same as the brand of your car. And it's been over 10 years now that is not the case, because the regulator stepped in and said, hold on now, people can get exactly the same thing with a different brand name and it's still good enough. So please open up the market, and please provide the information for people to be able to repair it, not just your authorized repair network. That's another thing we saw. We saw that in the home appliances legislation that came out at the same time as the new lighting rules on eco-design, where they said you have to be able to provide information to anybody who's a professional repairer. So not your authorized repair network, a professional repairer, someone who has minimum training and has insurance, and they need to have access to the information about your product to be able to repair it. So in my opinion, it's a question of maturity of the market. So the regulator typically will not step in until there's some level of maturity. And in lighting, that is not the case yet. There's still a lot of difference in applications and form factors and all that. But cars, much more standardized, washing machines as well. And there they did.
Okay. Let's take some questions. Yuris Grazoulas, I hope you pronounced your name correctly. Nowadays, all quality LEDs are capable of reaching 100,000 hours lifetime. The current problem is that driver devices are the ones that are failing, and their replaceability should be addressed. And overall, luminaires are designed for easily assembling. Main issue is cost to replace parts. I think that's, Kevin, what you touched on, really.
Yeah. Yes, I think there's another point that's also following on from what Nigel was saying earlier, is that if we are going to embrace replaceability of this bit, and we're saying this bit is potentially got a 15-year service life minimum, what are we going to be replacing it into? What warranty do we need, or not warranty, but what expectation do we need to have of the containing product lifetime to make that worthwhile? I mean, if we're talking about, you know, if you do it once, we're saying that's a 30-year life of the shell product. If you're doing it twice, you're saying that's 45 years. Now, I think we've already seen a point of one particular light fitting, and I've got one next to me here that has been around for a long time. It's an angle poise. Those are classics, and those are fine, and they're all made out of metal, and actually angle poise, for one, will replace parts for any of their historic fittings. That's not the case for the majority. And when you start looking at pushing prices down for more generic fittings, especially the lovely 600 by 600, how are those going to get put together? What sort of adhesives are going to be used? What sort of materials? I mean, we know a lot of plastics that are not good quality will degenerate in that time anyway, just from degradation. So they'll degrade much faster than 30 years or 15 years sometimes. So I think, you know, if you want to do this, then we're going to be pushing up the price, not just because they add on bits of stuff, but
that's me.
the framework
right.
that it goes in, the fitting that it goes in, needs to be a much, much higher quality thing. And Helen, I think, wants to point on this.
Yeah, I think what John touched on is that maybe we have to move towards a new business model where we really are renting the luminaire. We own the luminaire, we collect all the data, we know what's going on with it. And then it's our decision when it's the right time to upgrade or change it. It's our decision whether we go to site and we refurbish the luminaire there, or we take those ones down, put up new ones, and then reuse those old ones in a different project. And then also it means that, like Dave was saying, with the refurbishment market and having to have the business model to make sure you get a return on investment, if it's rented, the customer's capital is not used up at the start, and you can show them that the monthly cost can easily be covered by their savings in energy. So it stops being a financial decision and it becomes a different type of decision completely. So I really see the whole lighting market moving towards a different business model where all of these decisions we've talked about today come back to, if it's the manufacturer that's now owning that product, it becomes their decision when to change it and when to make sure the client has the correct technology to deliver the light levels they need in the areas that they need it. So we would then also be more incumbent to look at the sustainability of all of our decisions. And that's where we need the pressure from the market to make those correct decisions.
And presumably when you say sustainability, Helen, you're talking about the business model and maintaining margins, etc., rather than, no, you're talking about sustainability. Okay. The business model is a whole other challenge, isn't it? Because
it is, but it changes the equations. It changes the decisions. It puts them into different hands. And therefore, the parameters become different as well. So we could really look at a much, much more different way forward if those decisions are based on information, the data, knowing what's coming up, what's more efficient, what we could change things for. Yeah, it takes away all that proprietary brand of an LED board that a consumer might want to change in his own fitting. If it's now rented, they phone up and say, did you know, and we already do know because we've got the data from the control system, 50% of our fittings have failed. You wouldn't even get to that because we would already know and we would already have made a decision about what to do about moving forward.
Kevin.
Yeah, so that's me and Dave out of a job, basically.
No.
Okay, so instead of being independent, instead of being able to advise our clients in what's in their best interest, you roll along and say, well, no, what's in your best interest is for us to do this as a job. You and John fight it out between yourselves. You get the job and you decide what goes where rather than us. And us doing. That's totally what happens right now when this occurs. Totally what happens.
Yeah, I can see that in some cases it does, but we still need a designer. We still need the design to meet the needs of the customer. You understand the customer's needs in a lot of instances better than we do. And we need your input, we need your creative input, we need you to push the boundaries. We still need Dave to facilitate the actual on-site work, but it might be that we are employing him now rather than the client employing him. So yeah, we're not doing anybody out of business, but it might change.
Okay, we'll take a question now, if that's okay. Lewis Smith is saying, do you not see the use of recyclable plastics as a false statement? Polymers have a very limited life when recycled in comparison to ferrous materials such as aluminium and steel and glass. The ferrous and glass materials are also far more tactile compared to polymers, and in response to Helen's final statement, produce more desirable and robust or long-lasting products. Helen?
Well, materials are really another very, very interesting subject. We produced a sample luminaire made out of cornstarch a month or so ago.
Okay.
I can't see it going into production, but it was an interesting exercise. But all the time, new materials are being developed, and we need to be kept informed about these so that we can use the best ones for any products going forward. We do recycle a huge amount of our plastics and the metals within our plant. So any waste gets, plastics, any waste gets melted back down and put back in at the start of things. Plastics are a problem because they are here on Earth for a very long time, and at the end of life, they're much harder to recycle. They're quite easy to recycle at our manufacturing stage because it's new, pristine plastic, and we can just bung it back into the beginning of the system. Once it's been up in the ceiling for 20 years, that's going to be a lot harder to recycle. So I'm sure Nigel has lots of good ideas on that, how you can do it. It's not something I've got deep knowledge about, but I would suspect that it becomes harder once they've aged, once they've become more brittle and yellowed.
Okay, let's take some. Sorry, does anybody want to come in? No, okay.
Just quickly, Ray, if I could, I would throw this back at manufacturers and say it is really important, I feel, to start looking at how to incorporate an element, a proportion of recycled plastic into new fittings. And there's a real possibility that that will become a mandatory requirement, or at least it will create financial incentives. There will be, at a tax level or other level to encourage that to happen. So, yes, it's challenging. Agreed totally, Helen. But it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, it is already.
What's the point in recycling?
Yeah,
right.
We do already include a lot of recycled plastics in that initial stage, because we buy it in as a recycled plastic. But to take an old plastic out of one of our old luminaires in 20 years' time, we need somebody perhaps with a different manufacturing capability to then recycle that plastic, to then sell it to us, or then put it into the manufacturing process.
John.
And the 20-year-old plastic may be challenging.
Yeah,
I think very quickly, 3D printing, of course, is very much in line with this. We can 3D print, we can recycle. There is no shrinkage. We can just simply reuse. As Helen was saying, the plastics can be reused, but on 3D printing, you've got flexibility. You can reduce wastage. This is what it's all about. Circular economy is all about reducing waste, and the abilities with 3D printing, you can then start to 3D print close to the customer base. It's a small manufacturing process. You then save, you have less weight, you save on transportation, carbon footprint on transportation, on manufacturing. It's flexible, it's got flexibility. You can use other, we even at the moment are talking about recycling CDs, for example. It's kind of a little bit of a sideshow, but it shows that people are thinking now about what you can do for recycling. It's not just saying, oh, we need to recycle this, but looking at different benefits that you can get from these kind of technologies and these kind of sciences. And this is where the future of a much more sustainable industry lies. So, there is very much a case for it. I agree. There are some things which are more recyclable for a longer period of time, but everything that we can do and everything that puts people in the mindset of recyclability and reuse is great. Maybe there are other things, Helen, that we can do with the plastics of age that are perhaps beyond recycling, to be mixed with something else, again, to reuse those products.
Okay, I'll just take a couple of questions from that are coming in. John Bullock is saying we have to embrace better ways of recycling plastic material, and there are some great initiatives coming through. And the reason no one has come up with a viable plastic, excuse me, that's me. No one has come up with a viable plastic free future that's bearable to a developed society. Alan Tullett is saying, if clients are only concerned with the ROI, don't we have an ongoing problem in that labor costs will always be so much higher than replaceable components? An extreme example is £1,000 to replace a fluorescent tube above an escalator on London Underground. Alan Gooding is saying, we talk about retrofit product, that is another word for replace. So is replaceable the same, but at a more complex and smaller level, hence the challenge. Sophie Parry is saying, do you think there are lessons to be learned from the automotive and aerospace industries, whereby assets, in this case luminaires, are repairable by a refurbishment kit on site by the electrician, or via a manufacturer's refurbishment update for more sophisticated luminaires where thermal bonding is part of the design? the speed of technology dictates that by the time the mean time between failures swap out point is reached, any direct replacement is likely to be already obsolete. So the replacement needs to be more than just like for like. Dave, that sounds like your kind of street. Can you see your clients getting in and getting things refurbed at that sort of granularity?
So I guess we the kind of we as the network of people I work with, we do some refurbishment of luminaires. So we replace gear trays. Emergency lighting is a good example where a number of manufacturers have sealed bulkheads, where a number of them have replaceable gear trays, replaceable battery units. So we favour the manufacturer that has a replaceable gear tray and or battery unit, because that just makes complete sense from any direction you look at it. I'd love to know the contractor that's charging £1,000 to change a tube, even if it is TfL. I find some of the figures that people give us for what they're paying to be, I'm not going to say unrealistic, because if it's what they're paying, but while the maintenance element is important, don't forget the maintenance element of what you were doing still has to be taken into account. So when you're doing an LED scheme, if it's not being funded, because funded usually only takes account of energy saving, the maintenance regime element is taken into account. Once we're into the LED world, then one of the issues I do have with some of the comments about kind of the LED luminaire not being available. So if a manufacturer issues a 7-year warranty, by definition, that luminaire has to be available. You know, you cannot issue a warranty for something and then not fulfill that warranty. That's under, I think I remember, Ray, a long time ago, you held a conference on consumer law. Now we use consumer law a lot to make and manufacturers understand that if they say something's replaceable or something will be available and I've got a 7-year warranty on it, that is what will happen.
Dave, do you think, would any of your clients go for constant light output? Would they pay for that sort of tech?
Yeah, I mean, more and more of them, as I said at the beginning, we had a scenario where, I won't mention any names, a facility was point for point and the staff pretty much decided to walk out. So we had to redesign it. Now, if you're going to redesign it and include controls as part of that design, or point for point and use controls, the client is at that point, because they're kind of recognizing what they need to do, they're actually more interested in putting in sensible control, particularly if we're saying to them, look, if you're point for point, we're going to trim the light output down by 30% just to begin with. That's your starter for 10. And then over time, we will release the light to keep your light levels the same. But effectively, we are pushing the life of your installation out by a factor of 5 years. That's the type of thing that they like to hear. But I'm with Kevin on manufacturers. What have I heard? Light as a service. And at one level, I am a bit of a supporter of light as a service. So we kind of get involved in leasing, renting, whatever the appropriate term would be. But I don't actually worry about manufacturers taking over everything, Kevin, because they'd be very interested in the big clients, but not so interested in a lot of the small ones, where actually the service element that I'm sure Kevin and others provide is key. It's not just about the big players.
Kevin, did you want to come back on that?
Well, I'm not so sure. I'm a bit cynical. We are already losing work to manufacturers, and a good example in the UK is hospitals, where we've been involved in a number of hospitals at early doors, working with architects and contractors to produce the financial close design. Thereafter, what happens is that manufacturers, and one in particular, comes in and says, right, we will do all the lighting in here for X pounds per square meter, and you don't need to worry about a thing anymore. And every contractor just says, yeah, take it. And what happens then is that manufacturer will essentially strip everything that's interesting and good and quality out of the lighting scheme to put in the cheapest equipment that they can get away with. And essentially, if you're looking at any other scheme where the manufacturer is leading it, their interest is in whatever that is. In the current case, it's capital. In the next case, we're saying it's, well, what is going to be the cheapest thing for us to put up in that ceiling and maintain, or not need to maintain for the longest period. In that scenario, you might get better quality, technical quality equipment, but I think there will be pushes and shoves onto how the lighting would work in that space, and where things that are seen as extraneous are going to go away from the scheme. I mean, examples of such things would be, you have a nice scheme with a degree of cove lighting in it and a degree of downlighting. You can bet the cove lighting will disappear pretty pronto because it's seen as decorative only, and the downlighting gets boosted up to produce a number rather than the lighting quality. And in reality, I cannot see that wouldn't be the outcome, because ultimately we're talking about economic drivers here. We're not talking about quality drivers. We're talking about something that is being sold to a client to give them a financial advantage by another company who is also seeking a financial advantage in it. So the risk to quality is very, very high.
Yeah, so I know where you're coming from. I think certainly from my perspective, it's probably why I haven't got that many clients, Kevin. So I tend to push very hard back on the client and say to them, the clients are responsible for the working environment that they end up with. They're responsible for the output. They're responsible for all of those issues. Emergency lighting is a great example where the client just thinks they can allow a manufacturer to do a design, let the installer do the work. And if anything is awry, then it's not their problem. And my whole goal in life is to make clients understand what they're getting. And if they agree that cove lighting with far better downlights that aren't as glary and offer soft lighting is the preferred, then I kind of put them into the responsibility of not allowing a major design change. And one of the things that infuriates me once we've completed the design and the specification is equal or approved. Because you're quite right, the contracting world is very adept at the word equal or approved, but the ultimate finish is not really what the client expected. And I have had occasions where I've been phoned by the client and lambasted for the poor quality of what's been installed, and had to visit their office and point out to them that nothing they've done is to comply to the original design and specification. It's kind of an interesting conversation after with the contractor, but I guess that's a different webinar.
Nigel, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. It was just to come back on, I don't think that lighting as a service automatically means you're going to get the worst possible, cheapest fittings put in place. We've got Recolight scheme members who will take back, the Whitecroft example that Ray gave at the beginning, will take back their fittings and will harvest certain parts from fittings and reuse them, and be able to sell them as a sort of second life, as new product again. And once a producer knows that they're going to get the product back at the end of life, and it comes back to the company that made them. They are the best company, almost certainly, to be able to tweak them, improve them, and give them a second life. So I don't share your concern that this results in a race to the bottom. I think the reverse might be true.
I think there's you've conflated two totally different points there. What Whitecroft are doing by taking fittings back and reusing them, that is absolutely good stuff, and that absolutely needs to be stuff that is done by most manufacturers, and that will need a big kick, a legislative kick, in order to make them do that, because they're just reluctant on the most part. But how can I say this without dropping somebody in it? People who do that sort of thing are exactly the same people who are destroying other design projects by putting them down to a price that suits them for supply, rather than for what was originally in a design scheme. This is a problem here. It will happen. It is happening now, not exactly in the area we're talking about, or not in the area of lumens, selling lumens rather than selling equipment, but it's the whole process of value engineering, good and bad, is really endemic right throughout lighting business right now.
Okay, Riyad Braham says, even if all quality LEDs can reach 100,000 hours lifetime, customers are not always asking for such a long lifetime. Installers or even distributors could look for shorter lifetimes and therefore lower prices for installations such as shops, where the whole shop design has changed over 3 or 4 years. So one question would be, could we upgrade the luminaires, or at least keep the LED modules and implement them in another envelope, giving it a second life? So that's a question really about over engineering. And John, do you want to take that?
Yeah, it's not a new question, is it? It's been asked several times, and if you just take the pure total cost of ownership and the pure capex, then yeah, of course you could look at suggesting a shorter lifetime and for a lower cost, but that's not really where we want to be. Certainly, you can obviously take those products if they're still got, if you've only used them for 50,000 hours, they've got 50,000 hours left in them. Very, very holistically, you could just take them and repurpose them somewhere else. There's no reason why not. The reality is you have to have a network for that. You have to have an awareness for it as well. And that's reharvesting essentially. And that's something which is part of circular economy. So there's no harm in that. In terms of over engineering, the reality is that we produce products, or manufacturers produce products to provide a certain degree of quality, of longevity, and yeah, you will find that there will be times where someone doesn't need that 100,000 hours. But this is why, again, if you have the service agreements in place, if you have a knowledge about it, feedback, not necessarily directly to the manufacturer either. You can use contractors who are more specialist in lighting. There can be advice along the way as to what to do and how to make the most of, in the most sustainable way, of product when you no longer need it.
Ray, can I just, while I've got manufacturers in front of me, can I just ask, so given that if the manufacturers looked at the light output of the good old famous 4x18 watt and looked at the general usage, why aren't we seeing luminaires at 2,500, 2,800 lumens with reduced wattages? So I'm really happy with the improvement in lumen output. I'm just less happy that my wattage is 33 when it doesn't need to be. It does enable me to sell controls, so I do. Yeah, there is that benefit, but realistically, we're having to now use more Where a client wants point for point because they cannot disrupt the ceiling, and there are genuine examples of that, we're having to use multi-power, well, they're not panels, multi-power boxes to enable point to point to be done properly because the client won't pay for the controls, and a follow-up, which has got nothing to do with this. It's just, as I've got a manufacturer in front of me, why when we started working on LED, didn't the manufacturing industry look at the cutouts, the circular cutouts of downlights, and make LED downlights actually fit their old ranges?
Great question. Dave, are you directing that at Helen or John?
Well, either of them can pick it up.
I can answer all of those.
Every single
Okay,
manufacturer, every single manufacturer I meet, I ask the question. It amazes me that big manufacturers didn't look at all the 2x26, 1x26, 1x18 that they've sold and thought, you know what, if we make an LED equivalent that will fit in that hole, that's a whole new marketing campaign.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we do have standard downlight diameters, which always stick to the same family of diameters for downlights. But even if we change from a very large aperture down to something because you no longer need that very large aperture, we do have a plate that you can put in if you've got an existing.
Cost.
It's not much at all.
You're trying to make the module, sorry.
John, go on, John.
You're trying to make the module at its most efficient. So the move to LED was to make the most efficient product you could have, again, to avoid waste. If that required a slightly different size, and I know it did in some cases, then exactly as Helen says, you can put in a bezel, and those bezels with the mass produced, they're a couple of pounds. You know, it's not a big cost. You can again come back to 3D printing. Of course, you can have you can pretty much do whatever you want with 3D printing in terms of size. So going forward, if there is a long standing problem with that, then that can be overcome with 3D printing as well. And just on the point about output as well, the other thing is that you can. It depends on which manufacturer you go to. It depends on whether which level of the industry you're aiming at to be a supplier of product, but you can set drivers in the factory to have a much lower output. There's a limit to it, but there's quite a range that you can have with the driver. So if you ask in advance, you can have it set to a separate level, to a lower level.
It's just a case of tapping into the control gear to give the output that you require. So it's not difficult.
So I've taken two things from this. Thank you. So I know now I can speak to Signify and get a Patris for £2. That's much appreciated. And yes, you're right. We do ask for lower rated drivers. I'm not going to quote any manufacturers. Actually, asking a manufacturer to put a lower rated driver into their existing Luminaire, it might be simple with your good cells, but it is not a simple process. Don't kid yourself.
But it's also a brilliant opportunity to sell controls. And they're not, these days, controls are not expensive. And the benefits are huge, especially if you add daylight detection and presence detection. It's going to well outweigh any cost.
So we do make those changes to the output, and it is relatively straightforward. I mean, it depends on the size of the project. It depends on which fitting you're looking at, but it's not a huge challenge.
Okay, I've got to take Kevin to hold that thought. I'm just going to take one last question. I'm going to put it to you, and that is from Chris Mahon, who's a senior products engineer at Ridley Group, and he's saying, you know, lighting companies a lot want to use the latest in luminaire design. Lighting, it can be a fashion statement, and we all know this. And therefore, clients want to stand out from the run of the mill. They want the latest stuff. So like any industry, we're part of a consumable economy, and we want the latest in clothes and cars and iPhones and all the rest of it. So, you know, how does that square with our circular economy? So I'll put that to you, Kevin, and then you can have the last word.
Well, I think John's got the answer for this straight away. If we have light engines that are long life, that high quality, and come with a decent framework, what John will sell us thereafter is a nice little digital file for our 3D printers, and we can change the look and shape and form of the Luminaire at home with our 3D printer, or in a factory, or not in a factory. There's going to be an availability of 3D printers on reasonable scale for products very quickly. So that is where the customization can come from. I think it'd be nice if we had some things that were other the petrochemicals to run through our 3D printers to make things. I mean, we are seeing some metal 3D printing these days, but that's expensive and difficult. But I think that is an answer to how you customize something where the basic engine, the LED engine, has a very, very long life.
Okay.
Cornstarch.
On that phrase, Helen, thank you. Cornstarch as a thought for today. We're up to our allocated time, so we're going to wrap up and let people get on with their days. Thank you, everyone, for all your questions and your comments you put in, and for joining us today on what is absolutely, we all believe, is a vital conversation that this industry needs to have with itself and with its customers and with its suppliers and with its supply chain. So I'd also like to thank all our superb panelists for sharing their expertise and their insights and their wit. Oriana, Kevin, Helen, John, Dave, and Nigel. And just to mark your card for that, for the 1st of December, we will continue this conversation, focusing specifically on Luminaire. What happens to a Luminaire at the end of its first life, and how do we stop it, prevent it going into a skip, and what can we do to make that more sustainable? So that is on the 1st of December at I think it's at midday, Suzanne. And so if you go to recolight.co.uk, click on events, drop down, and you can register there to be in the loop. Today's presentation has been recorded. You will get an email within the next hour or so, and you can refer back to the recording, and you can move around it, etc. And all the webinars from this year are there. So you should have 4, and then we'll see you again on the 1st. So thank you, everybody, for taking part. It's an important conversation. We will continue it, and we absolutely need to. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.